So let's get rolling on the next session. You heard from a lot of these gentlemen here that just talked about the return on investment and those aspects for adopting soil health systems. And so that's kind of the nature of our next session. And so Ms. Taryn Barclay is going to lead that session for us. I've had the pleasure of knowing Taryn for 2 or 3 years now, and she's the Senior Director of Strategic Partnerships and Stakeholder Engagement at Cargill, where she works to advance Cargill's food security, nutrition, and sustainability strategies and partnerships. And so I will turn it over to you, Taryn.
Thank you so much, Wayne, for the great introduction. It's a pleasure to participate in this panel and very much appreciate being part of your annual meeting today. I have a couple of slides, so I'm just going to make sure that you can see them.
Yes.
Okay, great. So at Cargill, and it was great, just to see some of the questions actually coming through, is how is private sector engaged in some of these topics, and thinking through, how do we help and support you as producers and farmers to adopt these practices. So at Cargill, we view agriculture as an opportunity, because we know that agriculture is how we'll ensure a safe, responsible, and sustainable food system. And to feed a growing population, to protect our planet, we really want to celebrate and elevate farmers who are transforming systems already, and how we can collaborate across the supply chain with farmers, ranchers, customers, and partners to scale solutions, that have lasting change. And for Cargill, as a company and a private sector company, we really want to be that most trusted partner. We have 155,000 employees across 70 countries. So we are thinking about these topics, from a global perspective. And I think that this last week, with the UN climate change report coming out, it certainly elevated the urgency of this need for collaboration, which is really why Cargill is seeing the opportunity to work across the supply chain to help implement soil health practices and unlock the climate change mitigating potential that we know exists in farmland and natural ecosystems. But we know that regenerative agriculture really starts with the farmer on the farm. And that's why Cargill has set a global goal to provide training on sustainable agricultural practices and improving access to markets for 10 million farmers by 2030. And we're partnering with farmers to help adopt and scale those sustainable agricultural practices that can build long-term viability of their farming businesses and supporting that next generation of farmers. We really want to improve inclusive access for farmers to the best available markets through our business and activities to really ensure that their products can get to the markets where they're most valued. And we know that pockets of regenerative agricultural systems do exist within a North American context, but we know that there's great opportunity to rapidly scale these soil health practices. So last year in 2020, Cargill committed to working with farmers to advance regenerative agricultural practices across 10 million acres of North American row crop farmland by 2030. In addition to working across our crop farmers, we also continue to explore ways that we can engage with ranchers to adopt sustainable grazing practices. Because we know that farmers, and it was so interesting to hear a little bit of the previous discussion, really looking for that more robust picture of all of the benefits associated with investing in soil health on your farms, those environmental and economic benefits. And we know that getting credible information about these benefits of soil health management systems can really be an influential factor in supporting greater adoption of soil health systems. So that's actually why, I'm very privileged to have been part of supporting the establishment of our engagement and partnership with the Soil Health Institute. So we have partnered with the Soil Health Institute to assess, demonstrate, and communicate the economics of soil health management systems across North America. And I'm really excited that Wayne and Archie are going to be spending a bit of time in this panel talking about some of the outcomes. But what we really supported SHI to do is to analyze across a number of experimental research sites to gather that data on soil health management systems, as well as interviewing 100 farmers across 9 states to assess the impacts of these practices on farmer profitability. This was a really significant study representing a large set of sites and farms. And we really wanted to support this 2-year project because we knew that there was growing interest and awareness about soil health practices, particularly around this holistic picture of all of the long-term benefits for farming businesses, both economic and environmental. And I can say that the results were really impressive. From the data assessments, SHI found that it does increase income and it can reduce average costs for farmers too. I don't want to steal too much thunder from Wayne and Archie, who I know are going to share more about these outcomes and the data that they saw through this economic assessment. But what was really exciting is how I think this research is going to help farmers who are exploring the opportunity to make these changes on their operations with a much more robust set of data points regarding the potential return on investment. And I think when we talk at this session today about the business case, it's really going to be about how do we use this data to strengthen that business case, not only for farmers, but for all actors along the supply chain to help advance these practices. It's very much, why Cargill has also set these goals, and it gives strong quantitative evidence of these economic benefits. So it's hugely exciting to see that really agriculture is how farmers can become more resilient and profitable while making a positive impact on the environment. So really looking forward to the session today and obviously learning a little bit more about this assessment. So I want to pass the baton back to Dr. Wayne Honeycutt, who, as I'm sure you all know, is very famous in these circles, the president and CEO of the Soil Health Institute, where he leads their programs to safeguard and enhance the vitality and productivity of soils. So Wayne, I'm going to hand over to you, and I'm going to stop sharing.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And hello again, everyone. I assume you can see my screen also?
Yep, looks great.
Excellent, excellent, good. Well, thank you very much, Taryn, for that overview and that introduction. Yes, we were very pleased to work with Cargill and really appreciate their support to allow us to evaluate the economics of soil health on 100 farms. We know that there's so many environmental benefits from adopting soil health practices, from reducing greenhouse gas emissions in storing more carbon in soil, enhancing water quality because they're reducing nutrient losses, but it's also really good for the farmers. But one of the really kind of remaining questions was whether or not we would be able to have the effect on economics that we were hoping was there. And so this project was set up with the objective of really providing the information that farmers need to know when they're deciding whether not to adopt these soil health systems, provide that economic information to them, because it's going to really be them to achieve these environmental benefits at scale, when they decide whether or not to adopt these systems. And so this project was set up where, as Taryn said, we evaluated economics on 100 farms across the 9-state region. We looked for farmers that had been already adopting these systems for a minimum of 5 years. And so a point that I want to make here is that this was not a random sample of all farmers in these 9 states. Instead, we were specifically looking for farmers that were adopting these soil health systems so we could, again, answer the question about whether or not these systems are economically viable for those farmers. But those particular 9 states do represent some 71% of the corn and 67% of the soybean that's produced in the US. And you can see here on the slide that there was quite a range in climate that was covered from a mean annual precipitation of 20 to 55 inches and mean annual temperature ranging from 43 to 61 degrees Fahrenheit. And of course, a wide range of growing degree days also. So a significant range in climate, and I'm sure those of you that know the soils also know that there's a significant range of different soils and soil properties across that region too. Giving you just a picture of kind of the characteristics of some of the farms. We have our first column on the left where we list all of the states where we sampled farmers. And you can see the number of farms that we identified and interviewed in each state ranged from 10 to 16, and that primarily they were corn and soybean producers. A few of them had a smattering of wheat. Down in Tennessee, they had some cotton and a few other crops. But in the last column in the table, kind of really the main message of the table is that these are not small operations. These are commercial operations, averaging some 1,940 acres per farm across all of the farms. So again, then with all of them that we interviewed, it represented some 194,000 acres. So this slide's a bit busy, but I promise I'll be gentle and just kind of talk us through it. What we have here is just explanation of looking at 3 of the different soil health management systems practices: no-till, reduced-till, and cover crops. And let's just look at no-till, and we have the percent of the planted acres that these farmers that we interviewed were using no-till. And so, for example, that first bar in Illinois, 74% of those farmers we interviewed in Illinois were using no-till. So you can see the general distribution there across the 9 states. And then this green bar here near on the end shows that on average across all 100 farmers, 85% of the planted acres were using no-till. Now you can see that they are significantly in the lead compared to the US, because in the US, some 37% of cropland uses no-till. Now, one of the things that perhaps sticks out to you is looking at the no-till data is the farms that we interviewed in Minnesota. About 54% of the planted acres was using no-till. And what those farmers told us was that the colder, wetter soils in Minnesota really kind of hindered their adoption of no-till practices. But then you can see the next category over, reduced till, they were making up for it by using a reduced tillage practice that they felt like worked better for them in those soils and in that climate. And in the last category on cover crops, you can see is quite a range of cover crop adoption, but across all of the 100 farmers in the 9-state region, 53% of the planted land was using cover crops. And again, that's significantly higher, 10 times higher than the national average of 5%. So in many ways, these farmers that we interviewed are leaders in this area. And so we just felt like we could have a lot that we could learn from them. So our general approach was that Archie, Flanders, and John Shanahan on our staff, they interviewed farmers about their production information. And based on that information, they calculated partial budgets where they're comparing the benefits and the costs both before and after the adoption of their soil health management systems. There are very detailed methodologies that are available on our website, some 4 pages with references and things like that if you want to go into that level of detail. And I'm sure Archie Flanders would be happy to talk to you about them at any time also if you want more detail on it. But in this partial budget analysis approach, that's why it's called partial, is that they're just using what's different between the management systems. And so, for example, if they were using a given herbicide both before they used cover crops and then after they started using cover crops, if that didn't change, then that would not be part of the partial budget process. But if they were using an herbicide before they started using cover crops and then they quit using that herbicide when they grew cover crops, then now that is included in the partial budget analysis. So that's just how it works essentially. And so then they used standardized long-term average prices because prices change daily in many situations. So they standardized a set of long-term average prices and used that for calculating changes in revenue. And then lastly, they did not use USDA payments. So here are the results. There's a lot on here, but I will talk us through it. Just kind of familiarize you with the results. Again, this is across all 100 farms. Looking kind of in the middle of the table, we have corn, and then off the right, we have soybean. And let's say just in each of them, we have benefits and we have costs. And so there's a number of different ways that you could incur benefits economically. You could incur benefits by reducing expenses. You could also incur benefits by adding additional revenue. And then you would just then total those up. In a similar way, you can have a number of different costs. Costs can be incurred because you have additional expenses, but they can also be incurred if you reduce your revenue. And then, of course, just total those up. And then, of course, then the difference between the total benefits and total costs would be then the change in the net farm income. So let's just kind of step through this. Again, this is the average across all 100 farms. Seed costs, it doesn't probably surprise anyone that seed costs were higher because so many of these farmers were growing cover crops. But one thing that may stick out to you is that you may think that, well, that seed cost looks about half of what it ought to be. Now, remember, 53% of these farmers adopted cover crops. And so that number it was divided by 100. This is an average of all 100. And so that's why it looks about as half as much as you probably think that it ought to cost. And so that's what this table represents. So I just want to use that as an example so that you know what type of numbers you're looking at here, averaged across all 100 farms. Another kind of major benefit that farmers consistently reported was reductions in fertilizer. Now, many of these farmers were also very, very adamant about soil testing frequently, and many of them were enrolled in the 4R nutrient program. And so I think this is a combination of the fact that they may be able to reduce their fertilizer inputs because they are doing things like growing cover crops that can recycle nutrients perhaps back to the surface. But it's also a reflection that they recognize that nutrient management is a key component of a soil health management system. So there's a number of factors that really kind of play into here while they were finding those additional financial benefits. Another one of the categories I would just kind of point out to you is increased benefits by reducing expenses from labor and fuel. And a lot of that was related to no-till, just time on the tractor and the fuel in the tractor because of the no-tillage. And in a similar way, a reduction in equipment ownership because of it's basically, as Archie describes, as amortized costs of some of the equipment, a lot of the tillage and other type of equipment. And so there was a reduced expense by converting to no-till in that way. Another one of the kind of the major areas kind of looking at changes in yield. Some, I believe it was 67% of them reported that soil health systems helped them increase yield. And they were asked specifically to not consider changes in technology, but to just focus on the changes due to adopting the soil health management system. And a number of them had kind of ground truth that many of them had some tracts of land and similar soils where they were still doing a comparison between their soil health system and their conventional system. So they were still using similar technology. And others were comparing some of their data to things like county averages or to neighbors' yields. But they really tried to account for what change in yield could be related to increased improvements in technology in relationship to compared to changes due to adoption of the soil health management system. And so that brought in some additional, obviously, revenue there. And then when you look at, again, the difference between the benefits and costs, the results across all 100 farms was an average increase in net farm income of $51.60 per acre when they were growing corn, and $44.89 per acre when they were growing soybean. Now, we all know that every farm is different. And so I thought you may be interested to just kind of look at the distribution of that across all 100 farms. And you can see that there were a few farmers that indicated a reduced income for when they were growing corn, but 85% indicated that they increased their income by adopting a soil health system, and again, averaging that $52 per acre that we just saw the previous slide. Similar relationships with soybean, except that some 88% reported that they increased income using the soil health management system. Now, a big part of that, not the only part, but a significant part of that, of course, is understanding the reductions in input costs. And so I just wanted to share with you what that slide looked like here. Again, just kind of picking up my pace. I see I'm short on time, but there's some, on average for corn, they reduce input costs by about $24 per acre, and for soybean by $17 per acre. Now, there were a number of additional benefits that they reported. We already mentioned yield. We all talked about reducing fertilizer. About 83% said they reduced fertilizer inputs. And notably, many of them said that they increased crop resilience to things like drought and increased access to their field. The number of them said they improved water quality. Some of them actually had some measurements being taken on their water quality, but many others were just seeing that the water was running clear and was determining that it improved water quality. So just kind of a quick summary. Average size that we sampled was 1,940 acres per given farm across 100 farms. They reduced their average production cost by $24 per acre for corn and $17 per acre for soybean. They increased their net income for 85% of the farmers growing corn and 88% of the farmers growing soybean. And then they increased that net income by $52 per acre for corn and $45 per acre for soybean. Some number of additional benefits were reported. 93% reported that they increased access to their fields, and 97% said they increased resilience to extreme weather events. So our main conclusion from this is that with given the current adoption rates across these 9 states, where it's about 41% adoption for no-till and about 60% for cover crops, that many, many more farmers could really increase their net farm income by adopting these soil health management systems. If any of you have an interest and would like to look at some state-specific webinars given that were described for describing these results, they were primarily developed for farmers. We reached out to different agricultural organizations in each state and provided webinars for them. And these are available on the SHI Soil Health Institute website. And also there's a corresponding fact sheet for each of them also. So I encourage you to please check that out if you're interested. So thank you very much for the opportunity, and I will turn it back over to you, Taryn.
Thanks, Wayne. Very good timekeeping. So thanks for that. There is a question in the chat that I thought was interesting just to ask you as to whether was there found in the assessment an association with the length of time that practices had been used for and those associated benefits?
Yeah, that's a really good and insightful question. This particular project, we did not find that. I mentioned that we were looking for farmers that had been employing these practices for a minimum of 5 years, but it turns out most all of them have been doing it much longer than that. I believe that was approximately an average of around 19 years of adoption for no-till and about 10 or 11 years of adoption for cover crops. So they all have been doing it for a much longer period of time. And it didn't really give us the information we needed to try to kind of analyze that length of adoption period. But that's a really good question and something that we are looking at in the future, is really trying to understand that transition period economics.
Yeah, that's really good, Wayne. And I think what's also been so helpful is then going into the state by state approach and presentation of some of the results, because I'm seeing a lot of questions coming through about could this be done in other parts of the country, because it is so context specific too. And I think that was what was very useful about this approach. So I guess I'm just going to ask one more question, and then we're going to hand over to Archie. One of the things that I'm seeing through is, the feedback that you're getting. How can we use this information, use these reports to help more farmers adopt these practices? What do you think are some of those ways that we could do that, or the ways to overcome some of the barriers?
Yeah, I think this particular project that Cargill funded, thank you very much, was actually really to address one of those primary gaps, is that lack of information on what is the economic viability of adopting these over the long term. So I really feel like that now that we are getting that question answered, and now that our next step is to really start working specifically with farmers during that transition period to adopting these practices. I think we're learning that's that next barrier, that additional barrier that we need to overcome, is to help them understand that in year 2, year 3, year 5, what's that transition look like economically? And then what management practices can be changed during that period? When can they start cutting back on some inputs or adding more, or whatever is needed? And so I feel like that is really kind of that next area for us, and that we're actually visiting with others on how we step into.
Okay, wonderful. Thanks, Wayne. Really good presentation. And I think I think that, further information will be shared, I know, in terms of how the audience can also access some of the information in the reports. Okay, well, I'm going to hand over now to Dr. Archie Flanders from the Soil Health Institute. Dr. Flanders is an agricultural economist at the Soil Health Institute, where he assesses the economics of soil health promoting practices and land management systems using data from long-term sites and integrating that with on-farm data. So Archie, really excited to hear your presentation on the economic outcomes of soil health practices. So I'm going to hand over to you.
Okay, thank you. The title of the presentation is Economic Outcomes of Soil Health Practices on Farms and Long-Term Research Sites. And with this is somewhat of a continuation of our previous presentation, with additional set of farm data that we use, but also with another set of data at long-term research sites. And again, the purpose and objective of our work is to fill an information gap that exists for farmers when they're considering the decision about whether or not to adopt soil health management systems. We see in the US, 37% of the planted acreage is with no-till practices, and 35% is with reduced-till practices. So totally, for what we can call conservation practices, we see that 72% of the acreage is with these practices. But the lagging number is the 5% of the acreage that is with cover crops. Our approach to fulfilling the information gap had two components, a two-pronged procedure. First of all, we developed a survey questionnaire for data collection. And with this questionnaire, we collected information for farm characteristics, as well as farmer perspectives of soil health management systems. And then also we collected field production data that compares initial conventional practices and adopted soil health management systems. And then our second approach to improving information about the economics of soil health is we employ information from the long-term research sites with soil health measurements and management data. And this study was funded by the Natural Resource Conservation Services. And so far we have completed 25 farms in this study. And as we complete these farms, these results will be reported for individual farms. This is an ongoing study in collaboration with the National Association of Conservation Districts. And with these data, we collected information from NACD soil health champions that represent diverse U.S. production regions. Our previous presentation was focused on the corn and soybean region of the U.S., but this analysis includes farms from different parts of the country. And we see the list of crops that are included in the data that we have for this analysis. This is a map showing the research sites for our 124 North American research sites study. And with this information, we were collecting data for 31 soil health measurements so that soil health could be assessed across different soils, climates, crops, and management practices. 87 of the 124 North American sites are in the U.S. And in doing this, Soil Health Institute project scientists visited the sites to collect data for the 31 soil health measurements, both with and without soil health management system treatments. And then the Soil Health Institute scientists conducted follow-up communications with the local site scientists to collect management data that's associated with soil health management system treatments. And this is the data that we're going to use for economic analysis, noting that the research at these sites was conducted to determine management effects on soil health, not economics. These studies were designed to measure the 31 soil health management effects, and they weren't specifically designed to evaluate economics. And the objective of conducting partial budget analysis with research site data is so that we can investigate the extent that economic outcomes are repeatable and they can be compared with the farmer experiences that we're going to evaluate with our interview data. And again, the partial budget analysis method is identical to what was in the previous presentation. And more information about this is available at our website. But the main thing to note for today's presentation is that only differences between management systems are included in partial budget analysis. The economic results that we see today will be changes in net farm income, not absolute levels of net farm income. And the change in net farm income is a calculation of the benefits that come from adopting a soil health management system minus the cost that are incurred from adopting the system. And in these studies, we don't include potential incentive payments that are possible from USDA. Oftentimes these payments are available for only limited acreage on a farm and for a limited duration. So this table shows the results of the 25 farms that we have conducted thus far. We see that the average change in net farm income for all the crops on the 25 farms is an average of $86 increase. More specifically, we'll go in and take a look at, first of all, farm number 3. It's somewhat of an outlier with the increase in $471. This farm was able to use adoption of soil health management system to adopt not only the soil health practices, but for corn and soybean to produce organic production. And organic corn and soybeans have premium prices on average, and the result of being able to adopt organic production with the soil health management system is a tremendously large increase in net farm income. This increase was even after adopting organic production. There was a slight yield decrease from the soil health management system that included organic, but nevertheless, the change in net farm income was still $471. And then also we can take a look at farm number 25. It also is an outlier with an increase in $425 in net farm income. This was a walnut farm in California, and this farm added cover crops and was able to tremendously reduce fertilizer application as well as chemical applications. And this farm number 25 is an ideal example of regenerative agriculture. The farm was not certified organic, but had eliminated all synthetic chemicals and fertilizer solely due to the adoption of multi-species cover crops. 4 of the farms of the 25 that we have analyzed so far use cover crops to generate additional revenue from grazing the cover crops. And we see the average for the 4 farms that did this was $26 per acre. And now, after looking at the individual farms, we would like to take a look at an aggregation of 10 farms. This is comparable to our first presentation when the farms were aggregated. In this case, we're taking 10 to 25 farms and aggregating them for results. These farms were the 10 who produce both corn and soybean. They produce with cover crops, planting cover crops before both crops. Both of them were all of them were either no-till, reduced tillage, and the average farm size was 1,844 acres. So again, the farms that we're analyzing are large commercial size farms. And these are the results from the 10 farms, similar to the cost benefit analysis of our previous presentation. We know that we have reduced expenses and additional expenses, and both for corn and soybean, the reduced expenses from adopting the soil health management system is greater than any additional expenses. So in this analysis, going up to the seed, all these farms produced with cover crops, and their average seed cost, in this case, it's going to be the cost of the cover crop seed, was $19.55 for corn and $15.30 for soybean. Generally, cover crops before corn are a little bit more expensive than before soybeans because you include in a mix a legume cover crop that can produce some nitrogen. On average of these 10 farms, we see that fertilizer reductions were much greater than any additions for both corn and soybeans, and also that pesticide reductions were much greater than additions. Again, the equipment ownership, labor, and fuel costs are primarily due to reducing these costs as you go from conventional till to no-till, and eliminate the cost of the implement and tractor and all associated costs. Now, in these 10 farms, going down to the revenue section, none of the farms reported a yield decrease, and approximately 1/2 reported a yield increase. So the average yield increase for corn over all the farms is 6.3 bushels for corn and 1.8 bushels for soybean. And so the bottom line, when you look at the difference in benefits and costs for both crops, change in net farm income was $48.36 for corn and $30.77 for soybean. Now we can take a look at the comparing the soil health management systems for farms and long-term research sites to see what any potential similarities in the two are. We calculated partial budget results for 90 treatments at US sites. And again, I'll note we use the same analytical procedure for our farm interview data as well as our long-term research site data. And note that at long-term research sites, the research methodology attempts to maintain control factors. For example, all factors are held constant and only the change in tillage practice, such as conventional till and no-till, are used in the analysis. However, farms, when they implement soil health management systems, consider any interrelated considerations. For example, if a farm is going from conventional till to no-till, they would likely adjust the planting date and or the planting depth for optimal no-till conditions. But when you're conducting field research, proper research methodology calls for maintaining control for all these factors. And so the input changes at long-term research sites are going to be similar to input changes for farms adopting soil health management systems. However, yield results at long-term research sites may be impacted by not making the optimal adjustments for soil health management systems. So these are the results from looking at some of the treatments in the long-term research sites in the states of Illinois, Indiana, Missouri, Ohio, and South Dakota. We averaged 15 treatments for corn and 13 treatments for soybeans. These were farms that initially started with our research sites that were initial conventional tillage, and then no-till was the adopted soil health management system. So again, we see that the total expense change is much greater for both corn and soybeans. Reduced expenses from adopting no-till were $30.08, and this is much greater than any additional expenses, and $8.69. And for soybean, it's similar, much greater reduction in expenses than any additions. Now, going down to the revenue section, this is where we see a difference in doing analysis of long-term research sites and farm sites. At the long-term research sites, there were more reports that had reduced yields. Rather than our farm interviews, it's generally either no change in farm yield or an increase. But for all of these sites, the average increase in corn yield was 3.78 bushels, but there was an average decrease of 7.11 bushels. So for corn, the decrease in revenue, just the revenue portion from adopting the soil health management system, is greater than the additional revenue. Now, for soybean, it's different. The average increase in yield was 1.5 bushels, and the average decrease was 1.19. So for soybeans, in addition to reducing expenses, there's also an increase in net farm income from adopting the soil health management system. However, over all the treatments, we still have an increase in net farm income for corn of $7.41, and for soybeans of $16.56. So as a summary of our two-pronged approach to analyzing soil health management systems, from our farmer survey data, we see that the soil health management systems increased average net farm income by $48 an acre for corn with cover crops, $31 an acre for soybean with cover crops, and $86 an acre for all the farms in our 25 sample that we have conducted thus far. And also, other U.S. farmers could increase their net farm income by adopting these soil health management systems or reduce tillage and planting cover crops. We saw earlier that there's much potential for increase in reduced tillage of agricultural land in the U.S., and even more potential to increase the planting of cover crops. And adoption efforts should focus on increasing cover crop acreage. And by doing this, reduced tillage as a soil health management system will simultaneously follow. And also, as future experimental plot research is conducted, it should combine proper research methods also with applicable farm-based decisions to try to employ some of the decisions and that farmers would use in the research plots that farmers would do if they were adopting the soil health management system on the farm. Again, I'd like to thank the NRCS for their support of this project. When all the farms are completed, the results for the reporting for the individual farms will be available at our website.
Thanks so much, Archie. That was a really great presentation. And again, I think we can just see the amazing outcomes, that are being experienced. So a couple of questions really related to perhaps some of the trends that you may have seen during this assessment time. Were there particular soil health measures that you saw could increase income the most? I mean, you talked a lot about perhaps like a recommendation on focusing on cover crops. Were there specific sort of things you saw that really yielded the best outcome?
In all of these studies that we have conducted, what we notice is logical and what you would expect. When you go from conventional till to no-till, just the no-till portion of it, that is the single largest increase in net farm income from reducing tillage practices. This is going to be immediate. As soon as you stop the tillage, you're going to reduce all the expenses of equipment ownership expenses, fuel, and labor. Now, the other benefits that come from soil health management systems, as was discussed earlier, are there's more of a time dimension to it. We have the results that these farmers in both of these studies have been adopting soil health management systems for a long period of time. Eventually, what happens many times is you're able to reduce fertilizer cost and pesticide costs, but these are going to be things that happen after several years. And right now, we don't have enough information to determine what the time horizon is. But other than that, we don't really have any specifics about what works better for than comparable practices. But what we can say that there is no one prescription. All these farms do things somewhat different. Every place, because they're different locations, slightly different soil, slightly different perspective of the farmer, they all do things somewhat different.
Thank you, Archie. I think that's a really important point. And I know a couple of the comments in the chat coming through about, the different dependencies on soil pH and other characteristics that really play a role. So I think those are important considerations. Okay, I feel like this panel just flew by and we had, hardly any time, but really fantastic information that was shared. And thank you so much. So Wayne, I'm going to hand back to you.
Great. Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you very much, Taryn. And thank you, Archie.